The Wonderful Glass. Time passed. I knew a good-natured druggist at Mentz named Hans Schnaps. The door of his laboratory opened on the Theermarkt. It was surmounted by a coat of arms in the place of a sign. Mercury's wand and the serpent of Aesculapius ornamented the panels. As for Hans, instead of remaining in his shop, he promenaded the streets with a big spyglass under his arm, leaving the dispensing of his drugs to two young men, his clerks. Hans was an original, and his appearance peculiar. His nose was long, his eyes were gray, and his lips always wore a half-sneering smile. From his broad-brimmed felt hat, his reddish drugget cloak, and his beard trimmed to a point, he might easily have been taken for a Flemish artist. I used to meet him occasionally at the tavern of the Tobacco Pot, when we would naturally play a game of cards or dominoes, and talk of the times and the weather. Schnaps saw no necessity for telling me his business, and I saw no reason for telling him mine. In fact, we cared little what the other did or how he got a livelihood. One day the burgomaster Zacharias said to me, "Dr. Benedum, you are often seen with one Hans Schnaps." "Yes, we meet occasionally, of late quite frequently, in fact."
"Schnaps is a fool."
"Ah, I hadn't discovered it."
"Nothing more certain. Instead of attending to his business, he does nothing but walk the streets with a big spyglass under his arm, wasting his time and losing his customers."
"That's possible, but it does not concern me."
"Very true, if only he were not married, and no one suffered by his neglect to look after his business but himself."
"Ah, is he married?"
"His wife is the daughter of one of our most worthy citizens, a well-to-do cloth merchant."
"Good for Schnaps. His wife will have a little fortune, then, one of these days."
"Which he will squander."
"On spyglasses?"
"No, with his foolish experiments. Do you know, Doctor, that when he is not out squandering away his time, he is in his basement making heaven knows what? If you accidentally glance in at the window, you see his spyglass leveled at you. Schnaps looks at you and bursts out laughing. And when the dinner hour comes, his wife is obliged to call out 3 or 4 times, 'Hans, Hans, the soup is ready.'"
"Poor woman, she is much to be pitied." The burgomaster, it was clear, half suspected that I was disposed to amuse myself at his expense. But he pretended not to notice it, and proposed that we should play for a pot of beer. I accepted, and we chatted of other things. These revelations excited my curiosity. What in the world could Schnaps be at in his basement? What was the meaning of having his spyglass turned toward the window? Was it simply nonsense, or was it a serious experiment? These questions were continually in my mind, and I felt that I should have no peace until I satisfied my curiosity. I therefore went to the pharmacy the following morning to see what I could discover. It was about 9 o'clock. Frau Schnaps, a little, nervous, dull-eyed, badly-dressed woman, one of those people who, without really uttering a complaint, find means to proclaim their martyrdom, Frau Schnaps received me behind the counter. "Good morning, madam," said I, bowing low and raising my hat most deferentially. "Will you be so kind as to tell me where I can find Herr Schnaps?" "In the basement," she replied with a significant smile. "Already?" There was something in my "already" that seemed to amuse the little lady. She intimated that I should take the door to the left. I hastened to feel my way through the passage and down the dark stairs, and, without meeting with any serious mishap, though I stumbled 2 or 3 times, soon found myself on the flagstones of the Schnaps laboratory. It was spacious and perfectly dry. On looking around, I discovered that it was encumbered with gigantic spyglasses, with mirrors of every conceivable size and shape, and lenses and prisms innumerable, in short, with all the paraphernalia of an optician. Schnaps turned quite surprised to see me enter.
"Oh," said he, "it is my good friend, Dr. Benedum. Glad to see you, very glad."
He came towards me with open arms, but I stopped him with a tragic gesture and cried,
"Stop! First know the object of my visit. I come on behalf of our worthy burgomaster to feel your pulse."
He reached out his arm, and I placed my fingers on the artery. After a moment's pause, I remarked with becoming gravity, You are not so ill as they say."
"Eh, what? Ill, I?"
"No, you cannot be said to really have a disease of the mind." My reply made the druggist laugh so heartily that Frau Schnapps looked down from the top of the stairs to discover the cause of her husband's good humor.
"Sophia! Sophia!" cried Schnapps. "What do you think they say of me? They say I'm crazy."
This burst was quite sufficient to satisfy Frau Schnapp's curiosity. With a sneer and a shrug, which might easily have been taken for an intimation that she thought people were not far in the wrong, she disappeared.
"Be seated, my dear doctor,"
said Hans, having become comparatively calm.
"Be seated. I don't know when I've laughed so heartily, but tell me, what am I really indebted for the honor of your visit?"
He brought forward an armchair for me, while he found a seat for himself on a low stool, where, with his grasshopper legs wide apart and his elbows on his knees, as he sat stroking his pointed beard with his long thin fingers, he presented a strangely unique appearance. I told him of my conversation the day before with the burgomaster, and Schnapps, instead of being incensed, indulged in another hearty laugh.
"The ungrateful burgomasterian donkey," said he. "That's the way he speaks of me, is it? When I am expending my days and nights in the energies of my genius in his interest. When I have just invented a syringe for the special benefit of his class. A superb, a magnificent discovery, Doctor. Look at this glass. It is the famous Schnapps syringe, the only instrument of its kind that has ever been thought of, much less constructed. Till now we have only had the means of refreshing and purifying the abdominal viscera. Well, sir, I, with my syringe, propose to refresh and purify the brains of all the idiots, the imbeciles and fools, official and non-official, whom I can persuade to subject themselves to treatment. I pour into the cylinder of the instrument you have in your hand a decoction of Voltaire, of Shakespeare, of Father Malebranche, or of someone else according to circumstances. I introduce the small end delicately into the eye. I push, and crack, my subject is a poet, a metaphysician, or simply a man of common sense, according to the decoction used."
Here Schnapps indulged in such a series of contortions, threw himself about to such an extent, that I expected to see him fall from his stool, but fortunately he preserved his equilibrium. "A very clever bit of pleasantry," said I.
"Pleasantry!" cried Schnapps. "Pleasantry! Nothing of the sort. You have too much sense, my dear doctor, not to know that our opinions depend upon our point of view. The poor wretch in his rags, without house or home, sees things in an entirely different light from that in which the nabob sees them. In his judgment, society is constituted on a false basis, and the laws are absurd."
"Without doubt, but—"
"But," interrupted Schnapps, "seat the fellow at a well-supplied table in a spacious mansion, surrounded by handsome grounds, and peopled with pretty women. Feed him on carefully prepared dishes, quench his thirst with Johannisberg, and place behind his chair a half-dozen lackeys who address him as sir, or my lord, or your grace, or what you will, and you will find that his notion of things will undergo as great a change as his condition has done. Then, in his judgment, everything will be quite as it should be. Then, according to him, our social demarcations are the outcome of perfectly natural causes. Then our laws appear to him as the master products of the human mind."
"Very true, my dear Schnapps, very true. What you say is the burden of one of the familiar chapters in the history of humanity. We see the things of this world through a convex or a concave glass according to the position in which we are placed. But I fail as yet to see your drift."
"Oh," cried Schnapps, "what I am driving at is very simple. Since everything depends upon our point of view, it is clear that happiness will be assured by our being able to see the things of this world in their most favorable light. And it is precisely herein that consists the inestimable merit of my discovery. You shall judge for yourself. Here, look into the instrument you have in your hand."
I did as he bade me, and could not withhold a cry of amazement and admiration. I saw myself president of the Society of Scientists of Berlin, tall and commanding in figure, and decorated with the orders of merit, of the Black Eagle, of the Brown Eagle, of the Red Eagle, of the Garter, and I don't know what all. I held the gavel and called the members to order. Through the windows of the amphitheatre I saw my carriage and horses and my lackeys in their rich liveries. Farther on I saw my wife, beautiful as the day, walking alone and pensive under the limes, and I said to myself, "Benedum, Benedum, fortunate Benedum, what a sublime genius, what a great man thou art!" An outburst of ironic laughter aroused me from this profound contemplation. I removed the apparatus from before my eyes and saw myself again in the basement, standing before the apothecary, who looked at me with a peculiar expression that seemed to me little short of malicious.
Well, said he, what do you say to that?
My dear Schnapps, I cried, you must let me have this glass.
What? Let you have it? Said he. Do you know that this little thing cost me 10 years of hard work and study? That with it I, in some sort, am the possessor of the universe? That I see my wife always young, pretty, and fascinating? That I am always cheerful and content? That with it I do not envy the proudest monarchs of the earth? That it renders me as rich as Croesus and more powerful than Xerxes, and that I would not part with it for anything in the world has to offer? Nor is that all. With this little instrument I can give myself clysters of metaphysics, of poesy, or of common sense, according to my desires and needs.
But tell me, I beg of you, I cried, how you chanced to make this sublime discovery.
It is not so marvelous as you seem to think, said he, laughing. It is simply a kaleidoscope, but a kaleidoscope of a new kind. Instead of letting its flowers and pieces of colored glass fall where accident takes them, it places them in a certain natural sequent order. In other words, you see here a union of the daguerreotype and the telescope, two instruments that the Creator has united in the head of man.
Here Schnapps brought from the depth of one of his pockets a shell snuff-box. After slowly inhaling a pinch of its contents, seemingly to assist him in collecting and arranging his thoughts, he continued.
3 years ago I endeavored to fix the solar spectrum on a copper plate. To this end I employed all the chemical combinations imaginable, without obtaining any satisfactory result. One day, with my plate coated with a more sensitive composition than any I had thus far used, I seemed to fix the red, orange, and violet rays. The plate assumed something of the colors of the rainbow. I was, as you can readily conceive, delighted, thinking that at last I was on the road to success, when my wife, in accordance with her immemorial custom, began to cry out, "Hans, the soup is getting cold, Hans, the soup is getting cold. Hans, 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 the soup is getting cold, the soup is getting cold." Such cries the devil himself could not withstand. I was compelled, whether I would or not, to interrupt my experiments. I placed my copper plate on the projection of the wall you see there, which usually serves as a place to put my candle, and went quietly up and seated myself at the table.
And what did you say to your wife?
Nothing.
In your place I should have wrung her neck. Schnapps smiled incredulously.
That night, he continued, after supper, I came down here as I was in the habit of doing. Fatigue and the annoyances I had had during the day prevented my returning to my work. I sat down in this armchair, and soon fell asleep. When I awoke about 1 o'clock in the morning, I found that my candle had burned out, but the light from a star entered at this little window, and striking the plate was reflected directly toward me. With my eyes involuntarily fixed on this luminous point, I got to thinking of my wife, of some of her disagreeable ways, and that I should be justified in endeavoring to correct them, and, in short, of the 1,000 little annoyances that I find myself daily subjected to. Finally, tired of these reflections, I fell asleep again. The next morning all was forgotten, when, glancing at the plate, I saw, what think you, my dream of the night imprinted on it with striking fidelity. My wife, the dining room, the clock on the mantel, the windows in the rear, the little yard beyond. In fact, everything in the room and connected with it to the smallest details. You can imagine my surprise and delight. It was then that I conceived the idea of my kaleidoscope. I saw that the human brain, like the eye of a fly, is an optical instrument with innumerable facets, that its products are delivered by refraction and may be gathered on a chemical substance, the composition of which I had just discovered. Thus, my dear doctor, all your thoughts and desires in this instrument are materialized. With its aid you can convey your wishes and conceptions more rapidly and more perfectly than language could possibly convey them.
This discovery seemed to me truly miraculous. My dear Schnapps, you're a wonderful man, I cried. Allow me to embrace you. You are greater than the pyramid of Chops. You will have a place in the eternal temple of fame, where you will shine like a star of the first magnitude. But I beg that you will enlighten me on this point. How can you administer clysters compounded of philosophy, science, poesy, or reason? This appears to me to be even more wonderful than the materialization of thought.
First, let me call your attention to certain general considerations of paramount interest,
said Schnapps, visibly flattered by my enthusiasm.
You must have remarked that the great philosophers, the great mathematicians, the great poets, and, in general, the great ideologues, in their days in misery, abused and scoffed at during their lives, and sometimes even hunted down like wild beasts, they become after their death the prey of a certain class of individuals known as practical men. Much has been said and written, time out of mind, against this exploitation of genius by mediocrity, but that has not prevented the practice from being as common now as it was in the days of Homer, of Pythagoras, of Socrates, and of so many other celebrated ideologues. They are persecuted and killed in order that reputations may be made and money coined out of their discoveries. That all this is wrong, quite other than it should be, is obvious, but at the bottom nothing is more simple, and I will venture to add more natural. In order that an idea may succeed in this world, it is necessary that it have the support of the masses. But the masses, who would not be able to rise to the level of the idea, pure and simple, comprehend it easily and perfectly when it is materialized. That is, they comprehend the fact. The supposed superiority of your practical men over your ideologues is due to their greater skill in effecting this materialization. These fellows are rich and powerful. They govern the world. It is to them that monuments are erected. Why? Because they place within the comprehension of the idiots and imbeciles the ideas of some poor devil of a truly great man, who died of hunger in a garret. Am I right, or am I not?
You are right, quite right, Herr Schnapps.
Very well,
resumed Schnapps, with an ironical smile.
My kaleidoscope suppresses all this practical presumption, and places genuine merit where it rightfully belongs. It materializes ideas and places them within easy reach of the masses. Suppose, for example, I want to add to my knowledge of metaphysics. I place my eye at the small end here, and you read to me Kant. As his reasoning enters my brain, passes through it, and out at my eye, it is imprinted indelibly on this plate. It then becomes materialized, becomes tangible, becomes something that my senses can take cognizance of, and consequently something that I can comprehend and appreciate.
While Schnapps explained this grand mystery to me, an irresistible desire to have his kaleidoscope took possession of me. "My dear Schnapps," said I trust you will make a number of these instruments. Such a discovery belongs to humanity."
"Humanity be hanged!" cried Schnapps. "I should like to know what humanity has ever done for me. It treats me as though I were a fool, a madman. It binds me to a woman whom I dislike, and it would let me die of hunger like all the other great discoverers if I had not my drug shop to fall back on."
"But you will rise in public consideration. You will secure universal esteem and admiration."
What do I want of the admiration of a crowd of dunderheads?" cried Schnapps. "Take from them the discoveries of Gutenberg, of Galileo, of Newton, of Volta, of Daguerre, and of Hans Schnapps, and you will have only a troop of asses kneeling before a sabre. The admiration of people of that sort, no, thank you. Let humanity make its own kaleidoscopes. As for me, I shall hold on to mine, and I shall use it for my own edification and advantage."
This exhibition of egotism exasperated me. "But, my dear Schnapps," said I, controlling my anger, "allow me to observe that your reasoning is absurd. True, you make sublime kaleidoscopes, but others cultivate the ground, sow, reap, have their corn ground for you, and even bring you the bread ready-made. Others erect pharmacies. Others make your clothes and shoes. Others procure wine, beer, and tobacco for you. Things you cannot well do without. We are all dependent the one upon the other, my dear Schnapps, and While I was, as I thought, making myself most eloquent after this fashion, the apothecary levelled his wonderful glass at me.
"Aha!" he suddenly cried, interrupting me. "I see what you are after.
Devilish little do you care for humanity. You want my glass, but you'll not get it. Ha ha ha!"
And he hastened to reduce it to its smallest compass and put it into a box, of which he turned the key. Then, turning to me with a triumphant air, he continued,
"You'll not stick your nose near it again. Let that be a lesson to you. Let it teach you not to play the hypocrite and preach philanthropy in your own individual interest. I see you, like a good many more I have met, are an oily fellow, Dr. Benedum. You are a philanthropist. You preach duty to me. I don't like such people as you are, sir, and you can in no way oblige me so much as by retracing the steps that brought you here."
My face had crimsoned to the very roots of my hair. I felt a strong desire to give Schnaps a drubbing then and there, but I suddenly remembered that his 2 apprentices were a couple of brawny fellows, either of whom would be a match for me, and prudently retired. Soon afterward I left Minsk to establish myself at Nuremberg, and it is now nearly 2 years since Schnaps and I last met. It seems, however, that he continues to promenade the streets in his red drugget cloak, with what is generally supposed to be a spyglass under his arm. At least, that is what the burgomaster Zacharias writes me. What a pity that such a valuable secret should be in the hands of such a crazy idiot. It is a singular fact that men of common sense have never invented anything. It is the fools who till now have made all the great discoveries. The Invisible Eye. 1. "About this time," said Christian, "poor as a church mouse, I took refuge in the roof of an old house in Minnesonger Street, Nuremberg, and made my nest in the corner of the garret. I was compelled to walk over my straw bed to reach the window, but this window was in the gable end, and the view from it was magnificent, both town and country being spread out before me. I could see the cats walking gravely in the gutters, the storks, their beaks filled with frogs, carrying nourishment to their ravenous brood, the pigeons springing from their cotes, their tails spread like fans hovering over the streets. In the evening, when the bells called the world to the Angelus, with my elbows upon the edge of the roof, I listened to their melancholy chimes. I watched the windows as, one by one, they were lighted up. The good burghers smoking their pipes on the sidewalks, the young girls in their red skirts with their pitchers under their arms, laughing and chatting around the fountain of St. Sabbat. Insensibly all this faded away. The bats commenced their rapid course, and I retired to my mattress in sweet peace and tranquillity. The old curiosity seller, Tubak, knew the way to my little lodging as well as I did, and was not afraid to climb the ladder. Every week his ugly head, adorned with a reddish cap, raised the trap-door. His fingers grasped the ledge, and he cried out in a nasal tone,
"Well, well, Master Christian, have you anything?"
To which I replied, "Come in. Why in the devil don't you come in? I'm just finishing a little landscape, and you must tell me what you think of it." Then his great back, seeming to elongate, grew up even to the roof, and the good man laughed silently. I must do justice to Tubak. He never haggled with me about prices. He bought all my paintings at 15 florins, one with the other, and sold them again for 40 each. This was an honest Jew. I began to grow fond of this mode of existence, and to find new charms in it day by day. Just at this time the city of Nuremberg was agitated by a strange and mysterious event. Not far from my dormer window, a little to the left, stood the inn, Fat Ox, an old auberge, much patronized throughout the country. 3 or 4 wagons filled with sacks or casks were always drawn up before the door, where the rustic drivers were in the habit of stopping, on their way to the market, to take their morning draught of wine. The gable end of the inn was distinguished by its peculiar form. It was very narrow, pointed, and on 2 sides cut in teeth like a saw. The carvings were strangely grotesque, interwoven and ornamenting the cornices and surrounding the windows. But the most remarkable fact was that the house opposite reproduced exactly the same sculptures, the same ornaments. Even the signboard, with its post and spiral of iron, was exactly copied. One might have thought that these 2 ancient houses reflected each other. Behind the inn, however, was a grand old oak, whose somber leaves darkened the stones of the roof, while the other house stood out in bold relief against the sky. To complete the description, this old building was as silent and dreary as the inn Fat Ox was noisy and animated. On one side, a crowd of merry drinkers were continually entering in and going out, singing, tripping, cracking their whips. On the other, profound silence reigned. Perhaps, once or twice during the day, the heavy door seemed to open of itself to allow a little old woman to go out, with her back almost in a semicircle, her dress fitting tight about her hips, an enormous basket on her arm, and her hand contracted against her breast. It seemed to me that I saw at a glance as I looked upon her a whole existence of good works and pious meditations. The physiognomy of this old woman had struck me more than once. Her little green eyes, long thin nose, the immense bouquets of flowers on her shawl, which must have been at least 100 years old, the withered smile which puckered her cheeks in a cockade, the lace of her bonnet falling down to her eyebrows. All this was fantastic and interested me much. Why did this old woman live in this great deserted house? I wished to explore the mystery. One day, as I paused in the street and followed her with my eyes, she turned suddenly and gave me a look, the horrible expression of which I know not how to paint, made 3 or 4 hideous grimaces, and then, letting her palsied head fall upon her breast, drew her great shawl closely around her, and advanced slowly to the heavy door, behind which I saw her disappear. "She's an old fool," I said to myself in a sort of stupor. My faith, it was the height of folly in me to be interested in her. However, I would like to see her grimace again. Old Tubok would willingly give me 15 florins if I could paint it for him. I must confess that these pleasantries of mine did not entirely reassure me. The hideous glance which the old shrew had given me pursued me everywhere. More than once, while climbing the almost perpendicular ladder to my loft, feeling my clothing caught on some point, I trembled from head to foot, imagining that the old wretch was hanging to the tails of my coat in order to destroy me. Tubok, to whom I related this adventure, was far from laughing at it. Indeed, he assumed a grave and solemn air.
"Master Christian," said he, "if the old woman wants you, take care. Her teeth are small, pointed, and of marvelous whiteness, and that is not natural at her age. She has an evil eye. Children flee from her, and the people of Nuremberg call her Fledermaus."
I admired the clear, sagacious intellect of the Jew, and his words gave me cause for reflection. Several weeks passed away, during which I often encountered Fledermaus, or bat, without any alarming consequences. My fears were dissipated, and I thought of her no more. But an evening came during which, while sleeping very soundly, I was awakened by a strange harmony. It was a kind of vibration, so sweet, so melodious, that the whispering of the breeze among the leaves can give but a faint idea of its charm. For a long time I listened intently with my eyes wide open, and holding my breath so as not to lose a note. At last I looked toward the window, and saw 2 wings fluttering against the glass. I thought at first that it was a bat, caught in my room. But the moon rising at that instant, I saw the wings of a magnificent butterfly of the night delineated upon her shining disk. Their vibrations were often so rapid that they could not be distinguished. Then they reposed, extended upon the glass, and their frail fibers were again brought to view. This misty apparition coming in the midst of the universal silence opened my heart to all sweet emotions. It seemed to me that an airy sylph, touched with a sense of my solitude, had come to visit me, and this idea melted me almost to tears. "Be tranquil, sweet captive, be tranquil," said I. "Your confidence shall not be abused. I will not keep you against your will. Return to heaven and to liberty." I then opened my little window. The night was calm, and millions of stars were glittering in the sky. For a moment I contemplated this sublime spectacle, and words of prayer and praise came naturally to my lips. But judge of my amazement when, lowering my eyes, I saw a man hanging from the crossbeam of the sign of the Fat Ox, his hair disheveled, his arms stiff, his legs elongated to a point and casting their gigantic shadows down to the street. The immobility of this figure under the moon's rays was terrible. I felt my tongue freezing, my teeth clenched. I was about to cry out in terror when, By some incomprehensible, mysterious attraction, my glance fell below, and I distinguished confusedly the old woman crouched at her window in the midst of dark shadows, and contemplating the dead man with an air of diabolic satisfaction. Then I had a vertigo of terror. All my strength abandoned me, and, retreating to the wall of my loft, I sank down and became insensible. I do not know how long this sleep of death continued. When restored to consciousness, I saw that it was broad day. The mists of the night had penetrated to my garret, and deposited their fresh dew upon my hair, and the confused murmurs of the street ascended to my little lodging. I looked without. The burgomaster and his secretary were stationed at the door of the inn, and remained there a long time. Crowds of people came and went, and paused to look in, then recommenced their course. The good women of the neighborhood who were sweeping before their doors looked on from afar, and talked gravely with each other. At last, a litter, and upon this litter a body covered with a linen cloth, issued from the inn, carried by 2 men. They descended to the street, and the children on their way to school ran behind them. All the people drew back as they advanced. The window opposite was still open. The end of a rope floated from a crossbeam. I had not dreamed. I had, indeed, seen the butterfly of the night. I had seen the man hanging, and I had seen Fledermaus. That day Tubok made me a visit, and as his great nose appeared on a level with the floor, he exclaimed,
Master Christian, have you nothing to sell?
I did not hear him. I was seated upon my one chair, my hands clasped upon my knees, and my eyes fixed before me. Tubok, surprised at my inattention, repeated in a louder voice,
Master Christian! Master Christian!
Then, striding over the sill, he advanced and struck me on the shoulder.
Well, well, what is the matter now?
Ah, is that you, Tubok?
Parbleu! I rather think so. Are you ill?
No, I am only thinking.
What in the devil are you thinking about?
Of the man who was hanged.
Oh-ho!
Cried the curiosity vendor.
You have seen him, then? The poor boy. What a singular history. The third in the same place.
How the third?
Ah, yes, I ought to have warned you, but it is not too late. There will certainly be a fourth, who will follow the example of the others. Il n'a que le premier pas qui coûte.
Saying this, Tubok took a seat on the corner of my trunk, struck his matchbox, lighted his pipe, and blew 3 or 4 powerful whiffs of smoke with a meditative air.
My faith, said he, I am not fearful, but if I had full permission to pass the night in that chamber, I should much prefer to sleep elsewhere. Listen, Master Christian. 9 or 10 months ago, a good man of Tübingen, wholesale dealer in furs, dismounted at the inn Fat Ox. He called for supper. He ate well, he drank well, and was finally conducted to that room in the 3rd story. It is called the Green Room. Well, the next morning he was found hanging to the crossbeam of the signboard. Well, that might do for once. Nothing could be said. Every proper investigation was made, and the stranger was buried at the bottom of the garden. But look you, about 6 months afterward, a brave soldier from Neustadt arrived. He had received his final discharge, and was rejoicing in the thought of returning to his native village. During the whole evening, while emptying his wine cups, he spoke fondly of his little cousin who was waiting to marry him. At last, this big fellow was conducted to his room, the Green Room, and the same night, the watchman passing down the street Minnesonger perceived something hanging to the crossbeam. He raised his lantern, and lo, it was the soldier with his final discharge in a bow on his left hip, and his hands gathered up to the seam of his pantaloons as if on parade. Truth to say, this is extraordinary, cried the burgomaster. The devil's to pay. Well, the chamber was much visited. The walls were replastered, and the dead man was sent home to Neustadt. The registrar wrote this marginal note. Died of apoplexy. All Nuremberg was enraged against the innkeeper. There were many, indeed, who wished to force him to take down his iron crossbeam, under the pretext that it inspired people with dangerous ideas. But you may well believe that the old Nickel Schmidt would not lend his ear to this proposition. This crossbeam, said he, was placed here by my great-grandfather. It has borne the sign of the Fat Ox 150 years, from father to son. It harms no one, not even the hay wagons which pass beneath, for it is 30 feet above them. Those who don't like it can turn their heads aside and not see it. Well, gradually the town calmed down, and during several months no new event agitated it. Unhappily, a student of Heidelberg, returning to the university, stopped day before yesterday at the Fat Ox, and asked for lodging. He was the son of a minister of the gospel. How could anyone suppose that the son of a pastor could conceive the idea of hanging himself on the crossbeam of a signboard, because a fur dealer and an old soldier had done so? We must admit, Master Christian, that the thing was not probable. These reasons would not have seemed sufficient to myself or to you.
Enough, enough! I exclaimed. This is too horrible. I see a frightful mystery involved in all this. It is not the crossbeam. It is not the room.
What, do you suspect the innkeeper, the most honest man in the world and belonging to one of the oldest families in Nuremberg?
No, no, no. May God preserve me from indulging in unjust suspicions. But there is an abyss before me into which I scarcely dare glance.
You are right,
said Tubok, astonished at the violence of my excitement.
We will speak of other things. Apropos, Master Christian, where is our landscape of St. Odelia?
This question brought me back to the world of realities. I showed the old man the painting I had just completed. The affair was soon concluded, and Tubok, well satisfied, descended the ladder, entreating me to think no more of the student of Heidelberg. I would gladly have followed my good friend's counsel, but when the devil once mixes himself up in our concerns, it is not easy to disembarrass ourselves of him. In my solitary hours all these events were reproduced with frightful distinctness in my mind. This old wretch, I said to myself, is the cause of it all. She alone has conceived these crimes, and has consummated them. But by what means? Has she had recourse to cunning alone, or has she obtained the intervention of invisible powers? I walked to and fro in my retreat. An inward voice cried out, "It is not in vain that Providence permitted you to see Fledermaus contemplating the agonies of her victim. It is not in vain that the soul of the poor man came in the form of a butterfly of the night to awaken you. No, no, all this was not accidental, Christian. Heaven imposes upon you a terrible mission. If you do not accomplish it, tremble lest you fall yourself into the hands of the old murderess. Perhaps at this moment she is preparing her snares in the darkness." During several days these hideous images followed me without intermission. I lost my sleep. It was impossible for me to do anything. My brush fell from my hand, and horrible to confess, I found myself sometimes gazing at the crossbeam with a sort of complacency. At last I could endure it no longer, and one evening I descended the ladder and hid myself behind the door of Fledermaus, hoping to surprise her fatal secret. From that time no day passed in which I was not en route, following the old wretch, watching, spying, never losing sight of her. But she was so cunning, had a scent so subtle, that without even turning her head she knew I was behind her. However, she feigned not to perceive this. She went to the market, to the butcher's, like any good, simple woman, only hastening her steps and murmuring confused words. At the close of the month I saw that it was impossible for me to attain my object in this way, and this conviction made me inexpressibly sad. "What can I do?" I said to myself. "The old woman divines my plans. She is on her guard. Every hope abandons me. Ah, old hag, you think you already see me at the end of your rope." I was continually asking myself this question, "What can I do? What can I do?" At last a luminous idea struck me. My chamber overlooked the house of Fledermaus, but there was no window on this side. I adroitly raised a slate, and no pen could paint my joy when the whole ancient building was thus exposed to me. "At last I have you!" I exclaimed. "You cannot escape me now. From here I can see all that passes, your goings, your comings, your arts and snares. You will not suspect this invisible eye, this watchful eye which will surprise crime at the moment it blooms. Oh, justice, justice! She marches slowly, but she arrives." Nothing could be more sinister than the den now spread out before me. A great courtyard, the large slabs of which were covered with moss. In one corner, a well, whose stagnant waters you shuddered to look upon. A stairway covered with old shells. At the farther end, a gallery, with wooden balustrade, and hanging upon it some old linen and the tick of an old straw mattress. On the first floor, to the left, the stone covering of a common sewer indicated the kitchen. To the right, the lofty windows of the building looked out upon the street. Then a few pots of dried, withered flowers. All was cracked, somber, moist. Only 1 or 2 hours during the day could the sun penetrate this loathsome spot. After that the shadows took possession. Then the sunlight fell upon the crazy walls, the worm-eaten balcony, the dull and tarnished glass, and upon the whirlwind of atoms floating in its golden rays, disturbed by no breath of air. I had scarcely finished these observations and reflections when the old woman entered, having just returned from market. I heard the grating of her heavy door. Then she appeared with her basket. She seemed fatigued, almost out of breath. The lace of her bonnet fell to her nose. With one hand she grasped the baluster and ascended the stairs. The heat was intolerable, suffocating. It was precisely one of those days in which all insects, crickets, spiders, mosquitoes, etc., make old ruins resound with their strange songs. Fledermaus crossed the gallery slowly, like an old ferret who feels at home. She remained more than 1/4 of an hour in the kitchen, then returned, spread out her linen, took the broom and brushed away some blades of straw on the floor. At last she raised her head and turned her little green eyes in every direction, searching, investigating carefully. Could she, by some strange intuition, suspect anything? I do not know, but I gently lowered the slate and gave up my watch for the day. In the morning, Fledermaus seemed to be reassured. One angle of light fell upon the gallery. In passing, she caught a fly on the wing, and presented it delicately to a spider established in a corner of the roof. The spider was so bloated that, notwithstanding the distance, I saw it descend from round to round, then glide along a fine web like a drop of venom, seize its prey from the hands of the old shrew, and remount rapidly. Fledermaus looked at it very attentively, with her eyes half closed, then sneezed and said to herself in a jeering tone,
"God bless you, beautiful one. God bless you."
I watched during 6 weeks, and could discover nothing concerning the power of Fledermaus. Sometimes, seated upon a stool, she peeled her potatoes, then hung out her linen upon the balustrade. Sometimes I saw her spinning, but she never sang, as good, kind old women are accustomed to do, their trembling voices mingling well with the humming of the wheel. Profound silence always reigned around her. She had no cat, that cherished associate of old women. Not even a sparrow came to rest under her roof. It seemed as if all animated nature shrank from her glance. The bloated spider alone took delight in her society. I cannot now conceive how my patients could endure those long hours of observation. Nothing escaped me. Nothing was matter of indifference. At the slightest sound I raised my slate. My curiosity was without limit, insatiable. Tulbach complained greatly.
"Master Christian," said he, "how the deuce do you pass your time? Formerly you painted something for me every week. Now you do not finish a piece once a month. Oh, you painters! Lazy as a painter is a good wise proverb. As soon as you have a few kreuzers in possession, you put your hands in your pockets and go to sleep."
I confess that I began to lose courage. I had watched, spied, and discovered nothing. I said to myself that the old woman could not be so dangerous as I had supposed, that I had perhaps done her injustice by my suspicions. In short, I began to make excuses for her. One lovely afternoon, with my eye fixed at my post of observation, I abandoned myself to these benevolent reflections, when suddenly the scene changed. Fledermaus passed through the gallery with the rapidity of lightning. She was no longer the same person. She was erect. Her jaws were clenched, her glance fixed, her neck extended. She walked with grand strides, her gray locks floating behind her. At last, I said to myself, something is coming. Attention! But, alas, the shadows of evening descended upon the old building. The noises of the city expired, and silence prevailed. Fatigued and disappointed, I lay down upon my bed. When casting my eyes toward my dormer window, I saw the room opposite illuminated. So, a traveler occupied the green room, so fatal to strangers. Now all my fears were reawakened. The agitation of Fledermaus was explained. She scented a new victim. No sleep for me that night. The rustling of the straw, the nibbling of the mice under the floor gave me nervous chills. I rose and leaned out of the window. I listened. The light in the room opposite was extinguished. In one of those moments of poignant anxiety, I cannot say if it was illusion or reality, I thought I saw the old wretch also watching and listening. The night passed, and the gray dawn came to my windows. By degrees, the noise and movements in the street ascended to my loft. Harassed by fatigue and emotion, I fell asleep. But my slumber was short, and by 8 o'clock I had resumed my post of observation. It seemed as if the night had been as disturbed and tempestuous to Fledermaus as to myself. When she opened the door of the gallery, I saw that a livid pallor covered her cheeks and thin throat. She had only her chemise and a woolen skirt. A few locks of reddish-gray hair fell on her shoulders. She looked toward my hiding-place with a dreamy, abstracted air, but she saw nothing. She was thinking of other things. Suddenly she descended, leaving her old shoes at the bottom of the steps. Without doubt, thought I, she is going to see if the door below is well fastened. I saw her remount hastily, springing up 3 or 4 steps at a time. It was terrible. She rushed into the neighboring chamber, and I heard something like the falling of the top of a great chest. Then Fledermaus appeared upon the gallery, dragging a mannequin after her, and this mannequin was clothed like the Heidelberg student. With surprising dexterity, the old woman suspended this hideous object to a beam of the shed, then descended rapidly to the courtyard to contemplate it. A burst of sardonic laughter escaped from her lips. She remounted, then descended again like a maniac, and each time uttered new cries and new bursts of laughter. A noise was heard near the door, and the old woman bounded forward, unhooked the mannequin, and carried it off. Then, leaning over the balustrade with her throat elongated, her eyes flashing, she listened earnestly. The noise was lost in the distance. The muscles of her face relaxed, and she drew long breaths. It was only a carriage which had passed. The old wretch had been frightened. She now returned to the room, and I heard the chest close. This strange scene confounded all my ideas. What did this mannequin signify? I became more than ever attentive. Fledermaus now left the house with her basket on her arm. I followed her with my eyes till she turned the corner of the street. She had reassumed the air of a trembling old woman, took short steps, and from time to time turned her head partly around to peer behind from the corner of her eye. Fledermaus was absent fully 5 hours. For myself I went, I came, I meditated. The time seemed insupportable. The sun heated the slate of the roof and scorched my brain. Now I saw, at the window, the good man who occupied the fatal green chamber. He was a brave peasant of Nassau, with a large 3-cornered hat, a scarlet vest, and a laughing face. He smoked his pipe of Ulm tranquilly, and seemed to fear no evil. I felt a strong desire to cry out to him, "Good man, be on your guard, do not allow yourself to be entrapped by the old wretch. Distrust yourself." But he would not have comprehended me. Toward 2 o'clock, Fledermaus returned. The noise of her door resounded through the vestibule. Then, alone, all alone, she entered the yard and seated herself on the interior step of the stairway. She put down her basket before her, and drew out first some packets of herbs, then vegetables, then a red vest, then a 3-cornered hat, a coat of brown velvet, pants of plush, and coarse woolen hose, the complete costume of the peasant from Nassau. For a moment I felt stunned. Then flames passed before my eyes. I recollected those precipices which entice with an irresistible power, those wells or pits which the police have been compelled to close, because men threw themselves into them, those trees which had been cut down because they inspired men with the idea of hanging themselves, that contagion of suicides, of robberies, of murders at certain epochs, by desperate means, that strange and subtle enticement of example which makes you yawn because another yawns, suffer because you see another suffer, kill yourself because you see others kill themselves, and my hair stood up with horror. How could this Fledermaus, this base, sordid creature, have derived so profound a law of human nature? How had she found the means to use this law to the profit or indulgence of her sanguinary instincts? This I could not comprehend. It surpassed my wildest imaginations. But, reflecting longer upon this inexplicable mystery, I resolved to turn the fatal law against her, and to draw the old murderess into her own net. So many innocent victims called out for vengeance. I felt myself to be on the right path. I went to all the old clothes sellers in Nuremberg, and returned in the afternoon to the Fat Ox with an enormous packet under my arm. Nickel Schmidt had known me for a good long time. His wife was fat and good-looking. I had painted her portrait.
"Ah, Master Christian," said he, squeezing my hand, "what happy circumstance brings you here? What procures me the pleasure of seeing you?"
"My dear Herr Schmidt, I feel a vehement, an insatiable desire to sleep in the green room of your inn." We were standing on the threshold of the inn, and I pointed to the room. The good man looked at me distrustfully. "Fear nothing," I said. "I have no desire to hang myself."
"All in good time, all in good time. For, frankly, that would give me pain, an artist of such merit. When do you wish the room, Master Christian?"
"This evening."
"Impossible. It is occupied."
"The gentleman can enter immediately," said a voice just behind me. "I will not be in the way." We turned around in great surprise. The peasant of Nassau stood before us, with his three-cornered hat and his packet at the end of his walking stick. He had just learned the history of his three predecessors in the green room, and was trembling with rage. "Rooms like yours," cried he, stuttering. "But it is murderous to put people there. It is assassination. You deserve to be sent to the galleys immediately."
Go calm yourself," said the innkeeper. "That did not prevent you from sleeping well."
"Happily, I said my prayers at night," said the peasant. "Without that, where would I be?" And he withdrew with his hands raised to heaven.
"Well,"
said Nickel Schmidt, stupefied.
"the room is vacant, but I entreat you do not serve me a bad trick."
"It would be a worse trick for myself than for you, sir." I gave my packet to the servants, and installed myself for the time with the drinkers. For a long time I had not felt so calm and so happy. After so many doubts and disquietudes, I touched the goal. The horizon seemed to clear up, and it appeared that some invisible power gave me the hand. I lighted my pipe, placed my elbow on the table, my wine before me, and listened to the chorus in Frieschütz, played by a troop of gypsies from the Black Forest. The trumpets, the hue and cry of the chase, the hautboys plunged me into a vague reverie, and at times, rousing up to look at the hour, I asked myself gravely if all which had happened to me was not a dream. But the watchman came to ask us to leave the salle, and soon other and more solemn thoughts were surging in my soul, and in deep meditation I followed little Charlotte, who preceded me with a candle to my room. We mounted the stairs to the third story. Charlotte gave me the candle and pointed to the door. "There," said she, and descended rapidly. I opened the door. The green room was like any other inn room. The ceiling was very low, the bed very high. With one glance I explored the interior, and then glided to the window. Nothing was to be seen in the house of Fledermaus. Only in some distant room an obscure light was burning. Someone there was on the watch. "That is well," said I, closing the curtain. "I have all the necessary time." I opened my packet. I put on a woman's bonnet with hanging lace. Then, placing myself before a mirror, I took a brush and painted wrinkles in my face. This took me nearly an hour. Then I put on the dress and a large shawl, and I was actually afraid of myself. Fledermaus seemed to me to look at me from the mirror. At this moment the watchman cried out, 11 o'clock! I seized the mannequin which I had brought in my packet, and muffled it in a costume precisely similar to that worn by the old wretch. I then opened the curtain. Certainly, after all that I had seen of the Fledermaus, of her infernal cunning, her prudence, her adroitness, she could not in any way surprise me. And yet I was afraid. The light which I had remarked in the chamber was still immovable, and now cast its yellow rays on the mannequin of the peasant of Nassau, which was crouched on the corner of the bed, with the head hanging on the breast, the three-cornered hat pulled down over the face, the arms suspended, and the whole aspect that of absolute despair. The shadows, managed with diabolical art, allowed nothing to be seen but the general effect of the face. The red vest and 6 round buttons alone seemed to shine out in the darkness, but the silence of the night, the complete immobility of the figure, the exhausted, mournful air, were well calculated to take possession of a spectator with a strange power. For myself, although forewarned, I was chilled even to my bones. How would it, then, have fared with the poor simple peasant if he had been surprised unawares? He would have been utterly cast down. Despairing, he would have lost all power of self-control, and the spirit of imitation would have done the rest. Scarcely had I moved the curtain when I saw Fledermaus on the watch behind her window. She could not see me. I opened my window softly. The window opposite was opened. Then her mannequin appeared to rise slowly and advance before me. I also advanced my mannequin, and seizing my torch with one hand, with the other I quickly opened the shutters. And now the old woman and myself were face to face. Struck with sudden terror, she had let her mannequin fall. We gazed at each other with almost equal horror. She extended her finger. I advanced mine. She moved her lips. I agitated mine. She breathed a profound sigh and leaned upon her elbow. I imitated her. To describe all the terrors of this scene would be impossible. It bordered upon confusion, madness, delirium. It was a death struggle between two wills, between two intelligences, between two souls, each one wishing to destroy the other. And in this struggle I had the advantage. Her victims struggled with me. After having imitated for some seconds every movement of Fledermaus, I pulled a rope from under my shirt and attached it to the crossbeam. The old woman gazed at me with gaping mouth. I passed the rope around my neck. Her pupils expanded, lightened. Her face was convulsed. "No, no," said she in a whistling voice. I pursued her with the impassibility of an executioner. Then rage seemed to take possession of her. "Oh, fool!" she exclaimed, straightening herself up, and her hands contracted on the crossbeam. "Old fool!" I gave her no time to go on. Blowing out my lamp, I stooped like a man about to make a vigorous spring, and seizing my mannequin, I passed the rope around its neck and precipitated it below. A terrible cry resounded through the street, and then silence, which I seemed to feel. Perspiration bathed my forehead. I listened a long time. At the end of a quarter of an hour I heard far away, very far away, the voice of the watchman crying, "Inhabitants of Nuremberg! Midnight! Midnight sounds!" "Now justice is satisfied," I cried. "The 3 victims are avenged. Pardon me, O Lord." About 5 minutes after the cry of the watchman, I saw Fledermaus, attracted, allured by my mannequin, her exact image, spring from the window, with a rope around her neck, and rest suspended from the crossbeam. I saw the shudder of death undulating through her body, while the moon, calm, silent, majestic, inundated the summit of the roof, and her cold, pale rays reposed upon the old, disheveled, hideous head. Just as I had seen the poor young student of Heidelberg, just so did I now see Fledermaus. In the morning all Nuremberg learned that the old wretch had hung herself, and this was the last event of the kind in the street Minnesänger. The Three Souls. 1. The year 1805 was the 6th year I spent at Heidelberg, studying transcendental philosophy. You know what university life is. It is a full existence, the existence of a grand seigneur. One rises at midday, smokes his old Ulm pipe, drinks 1 or 2 glasses of schnapps, then one buttons his polonaise up to his chin, adjusts his little Prussian cap above his left ear, and goes leisurely to listen for half an hour to the illustrious Professor Hasenkopf discuss such ideas as he may have selected a priori or a posteriori. Everyone is at liberty to gape or even to go to sleep if he so elects. The lecture over, one repairs to the brewery of King Gambrius, and stretches his legs out under a table. Pretty waitresses in their black taffeta corsets hasten to offer rye bread, sausage, ham, and beer. One sings the air of Schiller's Robbers. One drinks, one eats, and is oblivious to the care incident to this mundane existence. This routine you sometimes vary by putting your dog Hector through his paces, or by clasping the waist of Charlotte or Adelgund, when perchance a general melee follows in which blows are freely exchanged, tables are overturned, and glasses and chairs are broken. Then the watchman appears on the scene. You are seized, are conducted to the calaboose, where you are compelled to spend the night. Thus pass the days, the months, and the years. At Heidelberg one finds unfledged princes, dukes, and barons of high and low degree, and the sons of cobblers, pedagogues, and tradesmen. The young nobles band together, but all the others fraternize on an equal footing. In 1805 I was 32 years old, and my hair and beard already began to be streaked with gray. My liking for beer, tobacco, and sauerkraut began to lessen. I felt the necessity of change. As for Hasenkopf, with his discourses on the discursive and the intuitive, the apodeictic and predictive, he had succeeded in filling my head with a veritable potpourri. Not unfrequently I would stretch out my arms and cry, Kasperzahn, Kasperzahn, it is not good to know too much. Nature no longer has any illusions for you. You may say with Solomon, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Such was my frame of mind, when, toward the end of the spring of the year 1805, a terrible event occurred, which taught me that I did not know everything, and that the career of a philosopher is not always strewn with roses. Among my older comrades there was one Wolfgang Scharf, the most inflexible logician I have ever chanced to meet. Imagine a short, spare man with hollow sockets, white lashes, red hair cut short all over his head, a close-cropped beard that comes up high on his sunken cheeks, and broad muscular shoulders covered with the rags of what was once a handsome garment. To see him slip along the walls, a loaf of bread under his arm, his shoulders thrown forward and his eyes aglow with a strange light, was to see a picture that would not soon escape from the recollection. And yet my friend Wolfgang thought of nothing but metaphysics. For some 5 or 6 years he had lived on nothing but bread and water in a garret of the old shambles. Not once during all this time had he found a mug of beer or a glass of wine necessary to stimulate his ardor for science, or an ounce of animal food to give him strength for his sublime meditations. And yet, gaunt and half-starved as the poor devil was, I was afraid of him. I say afraid, for, despite his apparent marasmic condition, his osseous frame was endowed with almost superhuman strength. The muscles of his jaws and of his hands protruded beneath the skin like so many rods of iron, and then there was something sinister and forbidding in his look that was calculated to excite distrust. This strange being, in his voluntary isolation, seemed to have preserved for me alone a sentiment akin to friendship. He came to see me from time to time when, gravely seated in my armchair, he would acquaint me more or less in detail with his metaphysical lucubrations. "Caspar," he asked in an abrupt tone, "what is the soul?" And I, glad to have an opportunity to dispel my erudition, replied with a doctoral air, "According to Thales, it is a sort of magnet. According to Plato, a substance which moves of itself. According to Asclepiades, an excitation of the senses. Anaximander says it is a compound of earth and water. Empedocles says it is the blood. Hippocrates, a spirit diffused through the body. Xenophon, the quintessence of the four elements. Xenocrates— Good, he interrupted. But you, what do you think the soul is? I say with Lactantius that I don't know. I am by nature an Epicurean. Now, as you know, according to the Epicureans, every conviction comes from the senses. The soul being something beyond the reach of the senses, I can consequently have no opinion with regard to it. Nevertheless, Caspar, we know that very many creatures in the animal kingdom, insects and fishes, for example, are deficient in one or more of these senses. Who knows if we possess all of them, if there are not others of which we have not even a suspicion? That is possible, but being in doubt, I will refrain from venturing an opinion.
Do you believe, Caspar, that we can know anything we do not learn?
Assuredly not. Every science is the product of study and experience.
If that be true, how comes it that chickens no sooner leave the shell than they begin to run about and to search for food? How comes it that they discover the hawk, though high above them, and run for safety under the mother's wings? Do they learn to recognize their enemy while they are in the shell?
That is instinct, Wolfgang. All the animals obey certain instincts.
Then it seems that instinct consists in knowing what one has never learned.
Come, I cried. You ask me too much. He smiled contemptuously, threw the corner of his well-worn mantle over his shoulder, and left me without adding a word. I looked upon him as being a lunatic, but a lunatic of the most innocent description. Who would think it possible that a mania for metaphysics could, by any chance, be dangerous? This gives a tolerable idea of Scharf's mental and physical condition, when the old vendor of Kucheln, Catherine Vogel, suddenly disappeared. Catherine, with a basket suspended from her stork-like neck, was wont to present herself about 11 o'clock at the brewery of King Gambrinus. The students were in the habit of indulging their love of pleasantry with her, often reminding her of some of her youthful escapades, of which she made no secret, and at the recollection of which she herself laughed heartily.
"Heaven bless us," she would say. "We were not always 50 years old. We have had our merry hours in our time. Well, it's all past now. If those happy days could only come again."
With this she would heave a sigh, which was the usual signal for a general laugh. Her disappearance was noticed on the third day. What in the world can have become of Catherine? Can she be ill? It doesn't seem possible. She was in such excellent spirits the last day she was here. It was reported that the police were in search of her. As for me, I had no doubt that she had taken a trifle too much schnapps, and as she was going her nightly rounds, had fallen into the river. The next day, as I was on my way from Hassenkopf's lecture to the brewery, I met Wolfgang on the walk in front of the cathedral. The moment he caught sight of me, he hastened toward me with a triumphant air that made him appear quite other than I had ever seen him.
"I was looking for you, Caspar," said he. "I've been waiting for you for an hour. Come with me. I've triumphed at last."
His look, his gestures, and the tones of his voice all betrayed great agitation, and when he seized me by the arm and dragged me toward Tanner's place, I was seized in spite of myself with an indefinable feeling akin to fear, and yet I had not the courage to resist. The narrow street that we followed with hasty strides ran back of the cathedral among a lot of houses as old as Heidelberg. The square roofs, the wooden galleries, lumbered up with all manner of household utensils, the exterior flights of stairs with their worm-eaten steps, the innumerable ragged figures, some half-starved, and all curious, who leaned out of the windows to gaze at us as though they had never seen our like before. The long poles extending from one roof to another, hung with dripping hides, and then the dense smoke that escaped from the pipes that protruded from each story. All this reminded me of a resurrection of the Middle Ages. As the sky was clear, the sun shone here and there on the dilapidated walls and the motley scene, thereby adding to my emotion by the strangeness of the contrast. There are moments when we all lose our presence of mind. It never once occurred to me that I should ask Wolfgang whither he was leading me. After passing the quarter in which nothing was to be seen but misery and wretchedness, we reached an open place in front of the old shambles. Suddenly, Wolfgang, whose dry, cold hand seemed to be riveted to my wrist, introduced me into an old ruin that stood between the aforetime hayloft of the Landwehr and the storehouse of the slaughter yard. "Go on before me," said he. I coasted a rough wall, at the end of which there was a dilapidated winding staircase, which we ascended, though the accumulation of rubbish on the landings barely left us room to pass. At every story my comrade would say impatiently, "Higher! Higher!" And yet I would pause, ostensibly to get breath, and to examine the peculiar structure of the old ruin, but really to consider the advisability of beating a hasty retreat. Finally, we arrived at the foot of a ladder, which extended up into a loft. I cannot to this day understand how I could be so imprudent as to mount this ladder without pausing to make some inquiries, or to demand some explanation. It seems that madness is contagious. Arrived at the top of the ladder, I stepped out onto the littered floor and looked about me. I found myself in an immense garret. In the roof there were 3 small windows, and in the center of the space there was a small table covered with books and papers. Over our heads there was a complication of small timbers reaching to the ridgepole, which one instinctively felt ought to be, if it was not, the abiding place of the bats of the neighborhood. It was impossible to look out, as the windows were some 10 or a dozen feet above the floor. At first I did not notice a low door, and a large air-hole above it in the wall of the gable end. Wolfgang, without saying a word, pushed a box toward me, which did service for him as a chair. And then, taking from a dark corner a large stone pitcher in both hands, he drank deep of its contents while I looked at him half bewildered. "We are under the very roof of the old slaughterhouse," said he, finally breaking silence and looking at me with a strange smile as he replaced the pitcher. "The city council has made an appropriation to build a new one beyond the city limits. I've been here now 5 years without paying any rent, and during all that time not a soul has clambered up here to disturb me in my studies." Then, seating himself on some pieces of wood piled up in one corner, he continued, "But to come to the question I would discuss with you, are you sure, Casper, that we have a soul?" Come now, I replied in no very amiable mood. "If you have brought me all the way up here to talk metaphysics, let me get out at once. When you met me, I was just coming from Hassenkoff's lecture, and was on my way to the Gambrinus brewery, where I proposed to refresh my wasted energies with a substantial luncheon and some beer. I've had my usual dose of abstraction for the day, which is quite enough." "What a material existence some people do lead," said he with a disdainful shrug. "You seem to me to live only to eat and drink. Do you know I have spent days without eating a mouthful from sheer love of science?" "Everyone to his taste. You can live on syllogisms and abstract speculations while I must have sausages and March beer." He had become very pale, and his lips trembled with anger. But controlling himself, he replied, "Well, if you will not answer me, at least do me the favor to listen to my explanations. Every man feels the necessity of appreciation, and I want you to appreciate me. I want to see you amazed, confounded by the sublime discovery I have just made. An hour's attention to what has cost me 10 years' conscientious study is not too much, I think." "Very well, go on. I'll listen, but hurry up." Again there was a nervous contraction of the muscles of his face that made me more thoughtful. I began seriously to regret my imprudence in clambering up where I was in such company, and put on a graver mien with the view of conciliating the maniac. My attentive air seemed to have the intended effect, for after a moment's silence he resumed. "You say you are hungry. Very well, here is my loaf of bread and my pitcher of water. Eat and drink, but listen." "My appetite can wait. Go on. I'm all attention." He smiled scornfully and continued. "That we have a soul has been admitted from the earliest historic times. From the plant to man, every being lives is animated. It, therefore, has a soul. Is it necessary to spend 5 or 6 years listening to Hassenkoff to reply to me, yes, every organized being has at least one soul? But the more perfect the organization, the more complicated it is, and the more numerous the souls. It is herein that animated beings are especially different the one from the other. The plant has but one soul, the vegetable soul. Its functions are simple. It obtains nutrition from the air by means of the leaves, from the earth by means of the roots. The animal has two souls. First, the vegetable soul, the functions of which are the same as those of the soul of the plant, providing nutrition by means of the lungs and intestines, which are veritable vegetables. Second, the animal soul, the special function of which is to supply sensibility, and whose organ is the heart. Finally, man, who till now has embodied terrestrial creation, has three souls: the vegetable soul, the animal soul, the functions of which are performed as in the brute, and the human soul, which supplies reason, intelligence. Its organ is the brain. The nearer an animal approaches man in the perfection of its cerebral organization, the more it participates in this third soul. The animals which approach nearest to man in this particular are probably the dog, the elephant, and the horse. Man alone possesses this soul in all its fullness. Here he paused and fixed his eyes full upon me. After a moment he asked, "Well, what have you to say to that?" It's a theory like any other. All it lacks is proof." At this reply, Wolfgang was seized with a sort of maniacal exaltation. He sprang to his feet, throwing his head back and his hands up.
Aye, the proof was wanting. That is what for 10 years has tortured me. What for 10 years has been the cause of my vigils, my sufferings and privations. For it was on myself, Caspar, on myself, that I wanted to experiment at first. Abstinence pressed this sublime conviction more and more upon me, but without my being able to prove its correctness. But at last I have it. You yourself shall hear these three souls proclaim themselves. You shall be convinced."
After this enthusiastic outburst, which nearly chilled my blood, he suddenly relapsed into his wonted mood, and seating himself at the table continued.
"The proof is there behind that wall,"
said he, calmly, pointing to the gable end of the building.
"You shall see it directly. But first I must acquaint you more fully with the details of my theory. You know the opinion of the ancients with regard to the nature of the souls. In man they recognized 4. Caro, the flesh, a compound of earth and water which death dissolved. Manes, the apparition that hovers about the tomb. The name comes from manere, to remain, to tarry. Umbra, the shadow, more material than the manes, and disappearing after having once returned to its former haunts. And finally, spiritus, the spirit, the immaterial part of us, which ascends to the gods. This classification seemed to me correct. It was, however, necessary to decompose a human being in order to establish the distinct existence of 3 souls, independent of the flesh. Reason told me that every man, before attaining complete development, must of necessity pass through the existence of the plant or the brute. In other words, that Pythagoras' theory was the true one, though he was unable to demonstrate it. Well, the solution of the problem has been the study of my life. It was necessary to destroy in myself the 3 souls successively, and then to reanimate them. I had recourse to the most rigorous abstemiousness. Unfortunately, the human soul, in order to leave the animal soul unfettered, was of necessity the first to succumb. Hunger rendered me incapable of observing myself in the animal state. Physical weakness rendered me incapable of judging fairly. After a great number of fruitless trials on my organization, I became convinced that there was only one way of compassing my object, namely, to experiment on another. But who would be willing to sacrifice himself to this kind of research? Wolfgang paused. His whole face was aglow with an expression of maniacal enthusiasm. After a moment he added, "It became necessary for me to have a subject at any price. I determined to experiment in animam, Willem.
Great heaven, I thought. This man is capable of anything.
Do you understand me? He asked.
Perfectly, said I, with a glance at the latter. It became necessary for you to have a victim.
To decompose,
he added coldly. And have you found one?
Yes. I promised that you should hear the three souls. It will perhaps be somewhat difficult now, but yesterday you could have heard them, one after the other, howl and moan, entreat and threaten.
My extremities had become suddenly chilled, and as for my face, it seemed to me that all the blood had left it. Wolfgang was impassible. He proceeded to light a lamp, that usually served only to dimly illumine his nocturnal speculations, and going to the large air-hole in the wall to the left, said to me as he thrust the lamp into the dark space beyond,
"Come here. Look in here, and listen."
Despite a growing presentiment of evil and my desire to retreat rather than advance, my curiosity and the conviction that the wiser course for me was to do his bidding induced me to approach and look in the direction he pointed. There, by the pale rays of his lamp, I could see nothing but a dark space, extending some 12 or 15 feet below the level on which we were standing, and which had no issue, seemingly, except the one leading into the garret. It appeared to me to be one of those out-of-the-way places which the butchers had used as a receptacle for such worn-out fixtures and tackle as were no longer serviceable.
"Look sharp," said Wolfgang in a low tone. "Don't you see a bunch of old clothes huddled up in the corner yonder? That's old Catherine Vogel, the vendor of ginger snaps, who—"
At this moment he was interrupted by a piercing cry that sounded very like the cry a cat utters when in distress. At the same time the seeming bunch of rags straightened up, assuming the dim outline of a woman, who ran her hands convulsively over the wall, apparently in search of some opening through which to effect her escape. I, more dead than alive, the cold sweat starting on my forehead, sprang back and cried, "Oh, horrible! Horrible!"
"Did you hear?"
asked Wolfgang with the triumphant smile of a demon.
"Wasn't that the cry of a cat? What do you say to that? The old woman, before she became human, was one of the cat species. Now the brute reappears. Oh, hunger, and especially thirst, does wonders."
The wailing of the poor old woman had ceased, and the madman, having placed his lamp on the table, added by way of commentary,
"It is now 4 days since she has had any food. I induced her to come here by pretending that I had a demijohn of Kirschwasser to sell her. When I got her down where you see her, I closed the door on her. Her love of liquor works her destruction. She expiates her inordinate thirst in the interest of science. The first 2 or 3 days, the human soul manifested itself with wondrous energy. She implored, supplicated, and protested her innocence, saying she had never done anything to me, and that, in any case, I had no right to be at once her judge and executioner. Then she would become furious and threatening, and overwhelm me with reproaches, calling me villain, wretch, monster, and heaven knows what all. The 3rd day, that was yesterday, Wednesday, the human soul completely disappeared, and the cat showed her claws at full length. She was hungry. Her teeth became long. She began to mew and howl. Fortunately, we are pretty thoroughly isolated. If we were not, the people of the neighborhood would have thought last night that there was a regular pitched battle among all the cats of this side of the town. Her cries were enough to chill your blood. And now do you know what will happen when the brute is exhausted? The vegetable soul will have its turn. That will be the last to perish. It is known that the hair and the nails of the dead continue to grow. There forms in the interstices of the cranium a sort of human lichen called usnea, which is regarded as a kind of moss, and is supposed to be produced by the animal juices of the brain. Finally, the vegetable soul also will retire. You see, my friend, that the proof of the 3 souls is complete."
These were the ravings of a madman, and I should have so treated them, but the cry of old Catherine had penetrated to the very marrow of my bones, and I was no longer master of myself. I had completely lost my presence of mind, but suddenly emerging from my bewilderment, my indignation knew no bounds. I sprang to my feet, seized the madman by the throat, and dragged him toward the opening in the floor. "Wretch!" I cried. "By what right do you seize upon a fellow creature to satisfy your maniacal curiosity? I myself will deliver you into the hands of justice." My attack was so sudden and unexpected, and what he had done seemed to him so natural and justifiable, that at first he offered no resistance and allowed himself to be dragged to the top of the ladder. But there, turning upon me with the ferocity of a wild beast, he in his turn grasped me by the neck, while his eyes shone with the ferocity of an enraged beast of prey. Despite my utmost endeavor to resist, he thrust me back against the wall with the greatest ease, holding me with one hand while with the other he slid the bolt of the door leading to the dark hole. Divining his intention, I exerted myself to the utmost to free myself, but my antagonist seemed to be endowed with superhuman strength. After a short but desperate struggle, I felt myself again lifted from the floor. The next moment, to my horror, I was thrown headlong into the dark hole, while over my head I heard these strange words: "Thus shall perish the flesh that revolts, and thus triumph the immortal soul." I had barely reached the bottom of the place, bruised and breathless, when the heavy door, some 15 feet above me, closed, shutting out from my eyes the gray and uncertain light of the garret. 2. As I fell to the bottom of the den, my consternation was such that I did not utter either complaint or remonstrance. "Casper," said I to myself as I leaned against the wall, calm and resigned, "the question is now whether you shall be devoured by the old woman, or the old woman be devoured by you. Choose. As for trying to get out of here, it is useless. The maniac has you in his power, and he will be slow to release you. The walls are of well-laid stone, and the floor of heavy oak planks. No one knows you in the neighborhood, or saw you enter here. This is, consequently, the last place anyone will think of looking for you. It is all over with you in this world. You have seen the sun for the last time. Your only resource is this Catherine Vogel, or rather, you are the only resource of each other." This survey of my situation flashed through my mind with the rapidity of lightning, and gave me an affection of the nerves from which I did not recover for full 3 years. And when at that moment the pale, cadaverous face of Wolfgang with his little lamp appeared at the air-hole, and I, with my hands clasped in a prayerful attitude, attempted to utter an entreaty, I discovered my efforts resulted only in producing a series of grimaces. Not a sound came from my lips. He, as he witnessed my futile endeavor, smiled and muttered, just loud enough for me to hear him, "The wretch, he entreats." This was my coup de grace. I fell with my face down, and in my despair I should have remained long in this position but for fear of being attacked by the old woman. She, however, as yet had not stirred. Wolfgang had disappeared from the air-hole. I could hear him in the garret, moving his table and coughing in that dry, hacking way peculiar to dyspeptics. My hearing had suddenly become so acute that the least sound reached my ears, and made my flesh creep to the very ends of my fingers. I could hear the old woman gape, and as I turned toward her I imagined I could see her eyes glaring at me in the dark. At the same time I heard Wolfgang descend the ladder, and counted the steps one by one until the sound disappeared in the distance. Where did the wretch go? I know not, but during the rest of the day and all the following night he did not return. It was not till about 8 o'clock in the evening of the following day, when the old woman and I were making the very walls tremble with our cries, that he reappeared on the scene. I had not closed my eyes. I was no longer either afraid or indignant. I was hungry, I was famished, and I knew that my hunger would increase. Nevertheless, only faint sounds could be heard in the garret. I ceased my cries, and looked up at the air-hole. Wolfgang lighted his lamp. He was doubtless coming to see me, to speak to me. In this hope I prepared a touching appeal. But the light of the lamp disappeared, and no one came. This was perhaps the most terrible moment I experienced. I said to myself that Wolfgang, knowing I was not yet very materially weakened, did not deign to even look at me, that in his eyes I should not become interesting under 2 or 3 days, when I would be more dead than alive. It seemed to me that I could feel my hair grow gray on my head. Finally, my terror and despair became such that I lost consciousness. Toward midnight, I was awakened by a touch. I naturally shrank from it with disgust. At the same time, a cat-like cry, or rather mournful wail, chilled my blood, and seemed to make my hair stand on end. I expected to have a struggle with my poor old fellow sufferer, but her strength was gone. It was now her 5th day. I recalled the words of Wolfgang. When the brute is exhausted, the vegetable soul will have its turn. That is the last to perish. The hair and nails of the dead continue to grow, and then the lichen in the interstices of the cranium. I imagined old Catherine reduced to this condition. That I could see her moss-covered cranium. That I was beside her, and that our souls put forth their humid vegetation in silence. This fantasy took such a powerful hold of my imagination that I no longer felt the gnawings of hunger. In a sitting posture, I pressed myself into one corner with my eyes wide open, ready to profit by the first ray of light that should present itself. It was not long before a faint glimmer made the outlines of my surroundings vaguely visible. I looked up. Wolfgang's pale face was at the air hole. I had never seen it more expressionless. He seemed to feel neither satisfaction nor remorse. He simply observed me. If he had laughed, if he had seemed to enjoy his vengeance, I should have had some hope of moving him. But in the business-like look his features wore, there was nothing to encourage me. We remained for some time thus, with our eyes fixed upon each other. I, a prey to that fear with which the victim looks upon his executioner. He, cold, calm, attentive, as one who contemplates the inert. The insect, transfixed with a needle which the student observes with a microscope if it thinks, if it comprehends, is rent by emotions which I that night learned to measure. I was doomed to die to satisfy the curiosity of a maniac. I saw that entreaty would be useless, and remained silent. After having looked at me attentively for some minutes, seeming content with his observations, the monster turned his attention to old Catherine. I looked mechanically in her direction also. What I saw cannot be pictured by human tongue. The skin of her face looked as though it was glued to the bones, and her limbs were so emaciated that they seemed ready to pierce the rags that covered them. But for the feverish glare of her eyes, she would have had the appearance of being dead. To add to the repulsiveness of the picture, there were 2 snails that had crawled up nearly to the elbow of one of her bare arms. The sight was more than I could bear. I closed my eyes convulsively, saying to myself, "A day or 2, and my condition will be like hers." When I opened my eyes, the lamp was gone. "Wolfgang!" I cried. "God is above us all! Wolfgang!" As I feared, my cries elicited no response. After again spending some hours in thinking as best I could in the condition I was in of my chances of escape, and again coming to the conclusion that I had none, I suddenly determined to die, and this resolution gave me a little calm. I rehearsed the arguments of Hassenkopf relative to the immortality of the soul, and for the first time I found them incontrovertible. "Yes, our sojourn in this world," said I, "is only a period of probation. Injustice, cupidity, and evil passions dominate the heart of man. The feeble are crushed by the strong, the poor by the rich. Virtue in this world is a delusion, but in the next everything finds its true place and proper level. God sees the wrong of which I am the victim, and will recompense me for the suffering I endure. He will pardon me my inordinate appetites and excessive love of good living. Before admitting me among the elect, he wishes to purify and chasten me by a rigorous fast. I resign myself entirely into his hands, etc., etc. Nevertheless, to be strictly truthful, I must confess that, despite my profound contrition, my regrets for the brewery and my joyous comrades, for the careless existence which is cheered by good wine and the merry song, made me heave many a long sigh. I could hear the crepitation of the frying, the gurgling of the bottles, the clinking of the glasses, and my stomach yearned and lamented in a manner that showed it was as yet far from being weaned from the world. It seemed in some sort to form an independent being in my organization, and to protest with much earnestness against the Hassenkopf philosophy. The worst of my sufferings was my thirst. It was so hard to bear that I sucked the saltpeter of the wall to refresh myself. When the day, of which I could get a faint glimpse, reappeared, I had a paroxysm of rage which knew no bounds. "The monster is there," said I. "He has his loaf of bread and his big pitcher of water." Then I imagined him lifting the pitcher to his lips. It seemed to me that I could see torrents of water passing slowly down his throat. Oh, the wretch! Rage and despair took entire possession of me, and I strode about my dungeon, crying, "Water! Water! Water!" And old Catherine, from her corner, in a faint but agonizing tone, repeated after me, "Water! Water! Water!" In the midst of this scene, Wolfgang's sallow face appeared at the air-hole for the third time. It was about 8 o'clock. Seeing him, I stopped and said, "Wolfgang, look here. Starve me to death if you will, but give me some water. Let me drink from your pitcher, and then do what you will, but I will not reproach you." I paused for a reply, but not a syllable did he utter, whereupon I continued. "Whatever you are doing, however, is too cruel. You will have to answer for it before your God. With the old woman here, it is a different matter, but I am your equal. I, too, am a student, and find your system very beautiful. I am capable of comprehending and appreciating you. Give me a swallow of water. Do! Yours is the most sublime conception that ever was seen. It is quite certain that there are 3 souls. I ask nothing better than to be able to proclaim it. I shall be your most firm adherent, but come, are you not going to let me have just 1 swallow of water?" The wretch, without deigning a word in reply, he withdrew. My exasperation now knew no bounds. I threw myself against the wall with such violence that it is strange I did not break my bones. In the midst of my fury, I suddenly noticed that old Catherine had sunk down, seemingly more exhausted than ever, and the idea came upon me to drink her blood. Extreme necessity prompts men to do things the bare thought of which at other times brings a shudder. It develops in us the ferocity of the beast, and every sentiment of humanity and justice disappears before the instinct of self-preservation. Red flames flitted before my eyes. Fortunately, as I bent down to the old woman, my strength failed me, and I fell, with my face buried in her rags, unconscious. How long I remained in this condition I know not, but I was aroused from it in a singular manner, the recollection of which will forever remain impressed upon my memory. I was aroused by what seemed to me to be the howling of a dog. This howling was feeble, but so plaintive and touching that one could not hear it without being moved. I raised myself up, wondering whence came complaints so much in harmony with my own condition. I listened, and judge of my astonishment when I discovered that it was my own involuntary moans and groans that I heard. From this moment all recollection is effaced from my memory. What is certain, however, is that I remained for 2 days more in confinement under the eye of the maniac, whose enthusiasm on seeing his ideas triumph was such that he did not hesitate to invite several of our philosophers to his garret, in order to witness their astonishment and enjoy their admiration. 6 weeks afterward, I awoke in a little chamber in St. Agatha Street, surrounded by a number of my friends who congratulated me on having escaped with my life from the effects of this lesson in transcendental philosophy. When Louis Bremer brought me a mirror and I saw myself, thinner than was Lazarus when he came out of the tomb, I could not keep back my tears. Poor Catherine Vogel had given up the ghost. As for me, I narrowly escaped having a chronic gastritis for life, but thanks to an excellent constitution, and above all to the care of my good friend Dr. Killian, I in a few months became as robust as ever. It is hardly necessary to add that state authority laid a heavy hand on Wolfgang. But instead of being hanged, he was, after long proceedings, placed in an asylum for the insane. There he still discourses on his theory of the three souls, and rails at the ingratitude of mankind, insisting that if justice were done, monuments would be erected to commemorate his magnificent discovery.